Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 2, in focus. We look at a few specific examples from the scene as well as the scene itself. The events of the scene. We start with Capulet, Juliet's father, talking to Paris, a nobleman who is related to the prince who we've just met. Paris wants to marry Juliet. Capulet tries to put him off, says she's too young and that he should wait a few years. He suggests that his agreement is partly down to Juliet's choice, and so Paris should woo her. Pretty impressive, really, when you think about it from Capulet's point of view. It's obviously to his benefit to marry her off to Paris, but he's thinking of his daughter. Capulet then invites Paris to his party that night and points out there'll be lots of other women there, fresh female buds, as he calls them, and he should decide who the best is. Then at the end of the scene, Romeo and Benvolio enter and they meet with Peter, a Capulet servant who's delivering invitations to the Capulet party that night. Peter says he can't read. Good choice to take out the invitations. And so he asks Romeo to read the list to him. Rosaline is on the list. Peter invites Romeo and Benvolio to the party, assuming that they're not Montagues. Okay, so the big issues here that this really deals with is the idea of love and hate. Obviously, we saw both of those in the first scene, and we see the way that attempts at love work here, love in family and love also in terms of what Paris says he has for Juliet. So the first moment we're going to look at is pretty much at the beginning, when Capulet starts off by talking about his the way he's been forced to agree with Montague that they're not going to fight, and of course he doesn't seem that bothered about it. Really, he doesn't think it's hard to keep the peace. He thinks it's going to be fine, no problem at all. This seems to suggest that Capulet, despite what we saw in the first scene, is actually a far more reasonable man than we'd think. And then when he carries on to say to Paris about Juliet, that his child is, as he says, a stranger in the world and needs 2 more summers before she's ripe to be a bride, it does suggest again a real affection for his daughter. So that reasonableness is there straight away, and his love for his daughter seems to be the main concern that he has, because he's putting off Paris, even though he's probably as outstanding a husband for her as he could find. And then there's Paris. Now, Paris is a very polite person. We can see this. He calls him honourable. He refers to him as my lord, even though, of course, he's probably socially more higher up than him. But he's pretty pushy. Look at that. It's the third line he speaks to him, in which he pushes the conversation onto Juliet. And what do you think about this? And when Capulet then turns around and says, I think you need to wait 2 more summers, he comes back at him and says, there's younger people than he who are mothers, and forces Capulet to come back at him. So in this opening bit here, we meet these 2 characters. If you had this as a moment, the key questions to ask yourself are, what are our first impressions of Capulet here? Think about the way that he speaks about the dispute with Montague. Think about the way he speaks about his daughter. And think about this idea of empathy, a feeling that, how do we feel towards Paris? Do we feel like we're on his side? Do we have any empathy with him at this point, the way he's behaving? Now, the second key moment we can look at is a much longer speech by Capulet here. And the whole basic idea of this speech is that when he's again saying to Paris, look, I'm not going to say completely no, but you need to get her heart. And this idea that it's about her will as well. And then his attempt to kind of like push Paris to think about other women instead. So when we start at the beginning here, we look at the idea, as he says, he calls her the hopeful lady of my earth, his world, I suppose, and points out that his will is only a part of what's going on. He needs her consent as well. As you can see, it's a lot of love for his daughter, suggesting he'll give her a say in her marriage, when really it is all up to him. Now, as he then begins to talk later on in this bit about the party, we might get a slightly different view. Certainly the way he talks about the other women doesn't feel great for us as a modern audience. Okay, earth treading stars is quite nice. You know, stars walking on the earth, that's looking up to them a bit, making the dark heaven light. But calling them fresh female buds, if you think about what a bud is in a flower that's not yet opened, talking about that as something that Paris should go and have a look at and he might enjoy is a bit disturbing. They haven't quite flowered yet. And like her most, who you think is going to be the best, whose merit most shall be. The way he speaks about other young women at his party is far more like objects that can be won by Paris, isn't it? And he certainly shows no concern about them being too young, fresh female buds. So if you got this bit, it would definitely be talking about Capulet as a character. Think about the way that he was presented before and now how he speaks about his daughter, but also how he speaks about other women at the same time. Ask yourself the question, are the attitudes towards women we see something we just say as part of the time the play is set, or do they reveal something more about Capulet? So the big ideas, love and hate, we said there at the beginning was part of it. Think to yourself in this, is the view of marriage that you see in this scene what we would expect? We know that it's down to the father, so the way he gives options to Juliet, is that what you'd expect? And then think about family. It's our first view of parental attitudes. And it's interesting that Shakespeare brings in Juliet's father, Capulet, before Juliet. So what role does the father appear to play in the marriage of his child? Now, if you're thinking about how this links into the rest of the play, think about the love and hate, because much later on in the play, Capulet, of course, appears to change his mind on some of his views of marriage and whose responsibility it is. And Juliet's view of marriage in the next act, in Act 2, is obviously therefore learnt from her parents. So the way she thinks about her choice, taking her choice of marrying Romeo undercover, if you like, is obviously learnt from the way that Capulet's been. And then family-wise, do you think later on to Act 3, Scene 5, that's the confrontation between her and her father when she refuses to marry Paris? It shows you how that relationship has soured, because it's this topic that they're arguing about, marriage. The very next scene after this introduces the two mother figures in Juliet's life as well, so we can compare the father and mother relationships with her.